In science fiction and futurism, few concepts inspire awe like the Dyson Sphere, a megastructure completely surrounding a star to capture its energy. It's the ultimate monument to technological prowess, an entire star shackled to feed a civilization's hunger. We picture alien suns cloaked in glittering solar panels, or swarms of habitats basking in eternal daylight. The romance is undeniable. If one star can power a world, why not build a world around a star? Yet as wondrous as Dyson spheres and swarms sound, reality is far less kind. The universe imposes unforgiving constraints, astrophysical, thermodynamic, and even social, that make these stellar megastructures profoundly inefficient, unstable, or even misguided as a path for advanced civilizations. This deep dive will peel away the sci-fi glamour and examine the gritty details. Orbital chaos, blistering waste heat, existential risks, and alternatives that might eclipse the Dyson dream. Along the way we will blend rigorous science with a touch of poetic wonder, asking not just can it be built, but should it be built, and would wise aliens even try? The first cracks in the Dyson Sphere ideal appear when you ask the simple question, how could one physically construct and maintain a megastructure encompassing a star? The answers reveal a minefield of engineering impossibilities and orbital mechanics disasters. From the collapse of rigid shells, to the pinball chaos of swarming satellites, the astrophysical constraints are daunting. Freeman Dyson's original 1960 paper imagined not a solid shell, but a habitable shell, or loose collection of objects around the star. Fiction, however, often runs with the compelling image of a solid spherical shell enclosing the sun, as in the famous Star Trek depiction. Unfortunately, a rigid Dyson shell is fundamentally unstable and likely impossible given known physics. Here's why. Inside a hollow spherical shell, gravity cancels out. The star's pull doesn't hold the shell up. The shell would not automatically orbit the star. Instead, it's delicately balanced. Any slight offset of the star or shell would cause catastrophic drift. As Dyson himself noted, a spherical shell would be mechanically implausible. If the star shifted even a tiny bit off center, one side of the shell would feel a stronger gravitational tug, pulling the structure unevenly. The result, massive stresses and likely collapse. In 1985, a formal stability analysis showed such a rigid sphere would quickly tear itself apart under its own asymmetrical gravity. Consider the sheer mass and span of a Dyson shell. Dyson calculated that building a shell at roughly 1 astronomical unit would require mass on the order of Jupiter spread a few meters thick. No known material could withstand the gravitational forces across such a span. The compressive strength needed is far beyond anything in our periodic table. As one astrophysicist put it, no material known today could resist that force on a rigid sphere of 1 astronomical unit radius. The shell would either need unobtainium grade strength or constant active support. Some have suggested using thrusters or active supports to hold a Dyson shell in place. For example, a network of rocket engines, like a giant Shkadov thruster concept, could try to push the shell outward to counteract gravitational drift. But the energy cost of such a system would be enormous, possibly consuming all the energy the Dyson Sphere collects just to keep itself stable. In effect, you'd build a star-encircling power plant only to spend its output on life support for the structure itself. This defeats the purpose entirely. Recent research offers a tiny loophole. In certain binary star systems, a ring or sphere might find a stable equilibrium by encircling 2 masses. In March 2025, engineer Colin McInnes showed that a Dyson-like ring or shell of infinitesimal mass could perch stably at certain points between two equal mass stars. Essentially, the gravitational tug-of-war in a binary can pin a ring or shell in place at specific Lagrange-like points. It's a clever bit of orbital dynamics, but it doesn't save the concept for practical use. The analysis assumes an infinitesimally light shell. Real shells would still be massive, and a very specific configuration. As McInnes himself notes, the classic single-star Dyson shell remains unstable against gravitational forces, and would need unrealistically perfect alignment or constant corrections. So unless we're in a Goldilocks double star system, a rigid Dyson sphere is a non-starter. In summary, a solid Dyson sphere would be an orbital house of cards. Gravity provides no natural stability, materials can't hold it together, and any attempt to actively stabilize would eat up the energy you hope to gain. This is why even Dyson and subsequent thinkers have favored alternative designs, like swarms or Dyson bubbles, over a monolithic shell. Science fiction may love the image of a single gigantic sphere, but physics declares it nonsense, to quote Dyson's own view of the Star Trek version. Recognizing the futility of a solid shell, most Dyson sphere concepts turn into Dyson swarms or bubbles, swarms of many independent satellites or solar collectors orbiting the star in unison. This sidesteps the material strength issue, but it introduces a new challenge. How do you manage countless orbiting pieces without collisions or chaos? The answer is, with great difficulty. A Dyson swarm would be the most crowded orbital environment imaginable, making our current space satellite traffic look like an empty highway by comparison. Key issues with Dyson swarms include: in a stable planetary system, each planet occupies its own orbit, well separated by space. A Dyson swarm, by contrast, envisions thousands or millions of objects sharing a range of orbits, typically around 1 astronomical unit. If these satellites are not perfectly coordinated, their orbits will cross or bunch up. Over time, tiny perturbations from gravitational tugs, from the star, from each other, from remaining planets, will alter paths. Unlike a neat planetary system, a dense swarm has no traffic lanes. Imagine a celestial highway with no lanes, and millions of speeding cars. The risk of collision is immense. A single collision in a swarm could produce debris that triggers further collisions, a chain reaction known as Kessler syndrome. We worry about this effect with a few thousand satellites around Earth. A Dyson swarm could have billions. If guidance systems fail or orbits degrade, one impact could lead to a cascading debris disaster that grinds the entire swarm to dust. Astrophysicist Brian Lackey recently studied this scenario. Even an optimally designed minimal swarm, several hundred large satellites, might survive on average roughly 1 million years between collisions. But the first collision could happen much sooner, and a full cascade destroying the swarm would follow in only 41,000 years, roughly. In cosmic terms, 41,000 years is an eye blink. Your megastructure would barely outlast the civilization that built it, unless constantly maintained. Lackey's analysis underscores that active maintenance is not optional for a Dyson swarm, it's a perpetual necessity. Tiny course corrections, debris cleanup, replacing failed units, these would be an ongoing task. If the civilization managing the swarm ever collapsed or turned off the autopilot, the swarm would start grinding itself down relatively quickly. Without maintenance, stellar megaswarms are expected to be destroyed in most cases within a few million years, Lackey concludes. This might sound like a long time, but for a project meant to secure energy for billions of years, It's an inherent fragility. A Dyson swarm is not a build and forget solution. It's more like spinning dozens of plates in the air and never being allowed to stop. Other bodies in the system make stable swarms even harder. For instance, in our solar system, Jupiter's gravity would tug on swarm elements at 1 astronomical unit and destabilize them. Lackey calculates that Jupiter's influence could destroy a swarm at Earth's orbit in a mere few 100,000 years if not mitigated. Radiation pressure from the star, the force of the sunlight itself, could also slowly push on lightweight collectors and alter their orbits. And if the star is not perfectly spherical, most rotate and bulge slightly at the equator, its non-uniform gravity field adds further perturbations. A real swarm design might require removing or rearranging planets to prevent such disturbances. In other words, dismantling the rest of the solar system too, which is yet another monumental task. One proposal to reduce collision risk is a Dyson bubble of statites, solar sail satellites that hover by balancing light pressure against gravity, rather than orbiting conventionally. These could theoretically form a more closely packed, non-orbit crossing shell, since each statite stays fixed over its star. It's an intriguing idea, originally by engineer Robert Forward, and later by others. However, statites must dynamically adjust to solar output, and would still be vulnerable to drifting or falling if not perfectly managed. They also require extremely low mass per area, perhaps 100 nanometers thin, pushing engineering limits. Even if statites avoid some orbital mechanics issues, they introduce new engineering fragility. The sails can tear, fail, or get pushed by solar storms. In short, they trade one set of problems for another. The statite concept shows how desperate the measures must get to even imagine a stable Dyson configuration. Hovering sail satellites held aloft by sunlight, like an ethereal soap bubble around the star. If two swarm satellites do collide, the energies are astronomical. At 1 astronomical unit, orbital velocity is around 30 kilometers per second. A glancing blow between multi-ton structures at that speed would release energy comparable to a nuclear bomb. The debris from one smash could spray through the orbital plane, threatening other units. And unlike low Earth orbit, there's no atmosphere or easy way to clear debris around the star. A Dyson swarm collision cascade could turn a carefully ordered energy harvesting machine into a dusty debris ring, belting the star, a monument not to progress but to failure. Overall, the orbital instability and collision risk paint a picture of a precarious swarm always on the edge of disaster. Yes, in principle millions of independent orbiters could be coordinated, but it verges on requiring near magical levels of automation, self-repair and control. The smallest slip, and gravity and probability take over, grinding your megastructure to powder. An unmaintained Dyson swarm around a sun-like star might self-destruct on timescales of 10,000 to a million years, which is nothing next to stellar lifespans. Advanced beings would need to be eternally vigilant custodians of their swarm. One must ask, would a sensible civilization lock itself into such a high-wire act? Even if we ignore gravity and orbital mechanics, there's another volatile element at play, the star itself. Stars are not perfectly steady lampposts. They are dynamic, sometimes violent celestial furnaces. Building any megastructure around a star means signing up to endure the star's moods, from burps of plasma to epochal changes in brightness. Consider these stellar challenges. Our Sun occasionally unleashes flares and coronal mass ejections, sudden eruptions of high-energy particles and plasma. A large flare can deliver a burst of X-rays and charged particles that would fry unshielded electronics. A CME can hurl billions of tons of plasma into space at millions of kilometers per hour. For a Dyson swarm, a direct hit by a big CME could physically knock satellites off course or damage their solar collecting surfaces. Closer to the star, the intensity is even greater. Flares near Mercury's orbit can be extremely harsh. The swarm would need robust shielding or quick shutdown protocols during solar tantrums. Maintaining millions of units against repeated radiation blasts is a non-trivial task. We've seen satellites around Earth get disabled by much smaller solar storms. Now imagine an entire swarm weathering a stellar hurricane. Even in quiet times, stars constantly blow out a stellar wind, a stream of charged particles. Over years, this wind will erode and sputter surfaces. Micrometeoroids and interstellar dust also rain into the star systems. A Dyson structure presents a huge cross-section to any incoming debris. Impacts are inevitable. Tiny dust grains hitting at tens of kilometers per second can chip away at solar panels. Larger meteoroids could outright destroy a collector. In a solid shell scenario, if one were possible, a single asteroid or comet strike would be catastrophic. As Dirk Schulze-Makuch notes, an object the mass of Halley's Comet impacting a Dyson shell at orbital velocity would release energy on the order of 1 million hydrogen bombs. For swarms, the danger is more piecemeal but constant, a slow sandblasting of the infrastructure. The maintenance crew, likely automated drones, must continuously repair and replace units damaged by dust and meteoroid strikes. No structure around a star can avoid this cosmic wear and tear. Stars don't shine with perfectly constant output. Many stars have cycles. Our Sun has a roughly 11-year sunspot cycle with about 0.1 brightness variation, and larger stars can vary more. Over millennia, stars can brighten or dim slightly due to magnetic cycles or internal changes. A Dyson swarm would have to adjust to these shifts. For example, if the star's output increases, more waste heat is generated, and if it decreases, the swarm might produce less energy than expected. More dramatically, some stars undergo flares that temporarily boost brightness, or even larger outbursts if they are unstable. An advanced civilization must either build slack into their system so it can handle peak output, or face crises during stellar surges. On the scale of millions to billions of years, stars age. A civilization constructing a Dyson sphere likely aims to secure energy for a very long time, but eventually the star will change. Our Sun, for example, will slowly increase in luminosity over the next billion years, making Earth uninhabitable long before it becomes a red giant. A Dyson swarm around the Sun would intercept more and more energy, and thus more waste heat to dispose of, as the star brightens. Then, when the Sun swells into a red giant, the Dyson infrastructure would either be swallowed or incinerated unless it's moved outward. It's conceivable an advanced civilization could move their Dyson swarm, but these are extraordinary measures. Essentially, a Dyson structure ties you to the fate of a single star. The long-term stability of that power source isn't guaranteed. It might buy you hundreds of millions of years, but not eternity. If survival is the goal, one might choose to migrate between stars rather than build a monumental shrine around one destined to die. In summary, building around an active star is like setting up a metropolis around an active volcano, except the volcano occasionally spits relativistic plasma and will eventually explode in slow motion. The Dyson builders would need extreme resilience and adaptability to handle the star's violent outbursts and life cycle. This is not to say it's impossible for a sufficiently advanced technology, but it's a constant headache, a design dominated by worst-case scenarios. Perhaps truly advanced species prefer to tame safer power sources, or at least keep a healthy distance from their stars. rather than wrapping too closely and getting burned, literally and figuratively. Bringing together these points, the astrophysical and engineering limitations of Dyson spheres or swarms can be summarized as follows. A solid Dyson shell is gravitationally unstable and beyond material limits, likely to collapse without absurd levels of active support. A Dyson swarm avoids the shell's structural issues, but is orbitally chaotic, prone to collisions and rapid self-destruction if not meticulously managed. It's a juggling act of countless parts that can never be allowed to falter. The star's own activity, flares, wind, evolving output, constantly threatens the integrity of the structure. The Dyson infrastructure must weather a continuous cosmic storm, and eventually changes that could render it obsolete. Maintenance is not a side issue, it is the central issue. A Dyson megastructure would demand permanent civilization-wide stewardship to repair damage, prevent collisions, and adjust to the star. If the civilization's attention lapses, the structure unravels in short order. Simply put, it's hard to build a cage for a star. The megastructure concept pits technological ambition against fundamental forces of nature, and nature is not easily subdued at stellar scales. These constraints alone make one question the wisdom of a Dyson project, but even if a determined species could overcome or mitigate them, perhaps with godlike automation, self-healing materials, and predictive control systems, another layer of challenges awaits: thermodynamics. Capturing a star's energy is one thing, using that energy efficiently and dealing with the byproducts is another nightmare altogether. So let's suppose heroically that our advanced civilization figures out how to physically construct a Dyson swarm or partial sphere. Now they have access to the full fire hose of their star's power. For the Sun, roughly 4 times 10 to the power of 26 watts. Problem solved, right? Unlimited energy, but not so fast. Thermodynamics, the immutable laws of energy, heat and entropy, impose their own verdict on the Dyson dream. Paradoxically, capturing all of a star's energy might be wasteful, unnecessary, or even counterproductive. Key thermodynamic and efficiency issues include the problem of waste heat disposal, the diminishing returns of using every photon, the fact that more energy doesn't automatically mean more usable work, and how outer Dyson layers contribute less and less. So let's break these down. A Dyson Sphere's goal is often stated as harnessing 100% of a star's energy output. But we should question the premise. Does any civilization actually need that much energy? By the time you are grabbing every joule a star emits, you might be deep into diminishing returns territory. Advanced societies could find that capturing a fraction of the star's output suffices, especially if their technology is efficient. Consider that Earth's current civilization at any given time uses on the order of 10 to the power of 13 watts, which is tens of terawatts. That's a tiny fraction of the Sun's output. Even projecting generous growth and new energy-hungry endeavours, getting to use 1% of the Sun's power would be a staggering increase, on the order of 10 billion times more energy than we use today. Capturing all of it is another 100 times beyond that. One must ask, what exactly requires that much continuous power? There might be projects, planetary engineering, massive computation, etc., but any finite task could be done sequentially or in parallel without needing the entire star at once. This ties into the concept of energy efficiency versus appetite. As technologies advance, especially computing, they often become more efficient, doing more with less energy. An ultra-advanced civilization might achieve such mastery of efficiency that their needs plateau, or even decline in terms of power consumption. Instead of building a bigger furnace, a Dyson Sphere, to feed growing needs, they improve their insulation and stove, use energy smarter. It's conceivable that by the time a species could build a Dyson swarm, they have also developed ultra-efficient systems that obviate the need for star-scale power, except for vanity or extremely large-scale projects. In fact, Freeman Dyson himself saw his sphere concept as driven by Malthusian pressures, the assumption that life's energy needs grow relentlessly. But what if an advanced civilization finds ways to thrive without exponential energy growth? They might achieve a stable state, or prefer quality over quantity of energy. Grabbing every photon might simply be overkill, like filling an ocean when you need a swimming pool's worth of water. The second law of thermodynamics holds that you can't use energy without producing waste heat, unless you store it reversibly, which has limits. A Dyson Sphere by design captures starlight, high quality energy, and will inevitably convert much of it into low quality forms, heat and infrared radiation, when that energy is used. This creates a colossal thermal management problem. Freeman Dyson famously pointed out that a functioning Dyson Sphere would re-radiate its collected energy as infrared waste heat, essentially glowing in the IR spectrum like a warm stove. Instead of a bright star visible in visible light, a fully enclosed Dyson star might be dark invisible, but shine at say 300 Kelvin, approximately Earth temperature, thermal infrared. This was Dyson's suggestion for how we might detect such megastructures. Look for the unusual signature of a star's luminosity re-emitted as IR. To date, searches for IR signatures have been conducted, and none have conclusively found a Dyson Sphere signal. The key point here is waste heat is not optional. Even a perfectly efficient civilization that uses energy for work or computation must dump entropy somewhere. Usually that means radiating heat. Now imagine you're capturing 4 times 10 to the power of 26 watts of power. If you use it to do anything, run habitats, computers, industrial processes, etc., almost all of that eventually becomes heat that needs to be radiated away. The Dyson Sphere or swarm effectively becomes a giant radiator. To avoid overheating, it must radiate as much power as it absorbs, unless energy is being stored or exported elsewhere. So your megastructure will shine nearly as bright in IR as the star did in visible light originally. It's like turning a one-sun star into a one-sun infrared emitter. This is problematic for a few reasons. If part of the Dyson structure is meant to be habitable, with people living on the inner surface of a shell, as in some sci-fi scenarios, or inside habitats in the swarm, then the habitat can only tolerate so much temperature. Typically you'd want Earth-like conditions. That sets the waste heat radiation temperature around 300 Kelvin, 27 degrees Celsius. To radiate a star's worth of power at 300 Kelvin, the surface area has to be enormous, far larger than 1 astronomical unit radius if fully absorbing. If your Dyson Sphere radius is at 1 astronomical unit, to radiate all that energy at 300 Kelvin, it must be a near perfect blackbody, and still runs hot. If it's smaller radius, it radiates at higher temperature, which might be too hot for habitation. This is a thermodynamic squeeze. Either your Dyson Sphere runs cold and very large to radiate the heat, or it runs hot and becomes uninhabitable, or at least not life-friendly on the inner surface. In either case, managing the waste heat is a principal design driver. From a pure engineering perspective, dumping 10 to the power of 26 watts of heat to space is a colossal waste if you didn't truly need that energy in the first place. If an advanced civilization only requires say 10 to the power of 23 watts for their needs, Capturing 10 to the power of 26 means 10 to the power of 26 minus 10 to the power of 23 equals 99.9% of the star's output is just going to waste heat. Why bother capturing it then? You've built this huge infrastructure to grab power that you end up throwing away. It's like collecting all the sunlight falling on a continent and then using it to heat the night side of that continent for no reason. A truly efficient civilization might avoid generating waste heat that can be seen across the galaxy. It could be a form of cosmic modesty, or even stealth. As one analysis pointed out, if a Dyson Sphere ran at 99% Carnot efficiency, its waste heat signature would be so faint that it could blend indistinguishably into the IR background of dust and galaxies. In other words, a super efficient Dyson Sphere wouldn't glow like a bonfire at all. It would be almost invisible, because it's taking nearly all the energy and doing work or storing it with minimal loss. But achieving 99% thermodynamic efficiency is extraordinarily difficult. It's more likely a lot of energy ends up as heat, and if you're just going to radiate it away at low temperature, maybe you didn't need to capture it in the first place, unless you had a specific use. Not all energy is equal. High temperature starlight is low entropy, high quality energy that can do useful work. The waste heat the Dyson Sphere emits is high entropy, low quality energy. By capturing the star's light and converting it, even if just by absorbing and re-radiating, the civilization is increasing the entropy of the universe significantly. If they don't actually need all that work, they are just hastening the local heat death for no gain. A wise civilization might consider the entropy cost of megastructures. Every bit of energy you channel has an unavoidable toll in entropy. More energy equals more entropy produced. If survival and longevity are goals, blasting out colossal amounts of waste heat could be seen as burning your candle faster. There is even a hypothesis that advanced beings might choose to minimize energy use now and wait for cooler cosmic conditions to do stuff, precisely because dumping heat is easier in a colder universe. Why run a gigantic hot Dyson computer now, if you can run a much more efficient cold computer later, when the background temperature of the universe is lower? In summary, the waste heat issue indicates that a Dyson Sphere is thermodynamically flashy. It grabs a lot and then must emit a lot. That might be seen as wasteful or even dangerous, if you don't want to announce your presence. It's like building a huge furnace and then trying to air condition the planet from its excess heat. At some point, you'd ask whether it was wise to build such a big furnace at all. Some futurists have argued one way around the waste heat problem is to use the waste heat in additional layers of computation or energy use. This is the idea of the Matryoshka brain, a nested set of Dyson shells or swarms. The innermost layer directly uses the star's light for high power computation. It radiates waste heat which is captured by a second layer farther out, which in turn does slightly lower temperature computations, and so on, like Russian dolls of energy use. The outermost layer would radiate the final waste heat to space at a much lower temperature. In theory, a well-designed Matryoshka system could use the star's energy in stages, squeezing more useful work out of each photon by cascading it through successively cooler processes. However, even this exotic idea has flaws and diminishing returns. Recent research by astronomer Jason Wright indicates there is little to no advantage to nesting shells, Matryoshka style, for computation or work extraction beyond a certain point. In other words, a single layer Dyson Sphere, or only a few layers, can already use the energy efficiently. Adding many nested shells doesn't exponentially multiply your capabilities. Wright found that for a given amount of mass available, it's more optimal to make a small hot Dyson Sphere closer to the sun running at high temperature than a huge cold one or many layers. This seems counterintuitive. We often think bigger is better for efficiency, but the logic is that work is best extracted at high temperatures. A small sphere near the star can operate at say 600 Kelvin or 1000 Kelvin, getting lots of work per photon, whereas an outer shell at 300 Kelvin gets much less work out of each photon that reaches it. The outer shells end up catching mostly low quality energy. Wright's analysis suggests that if you have the engineering ability, you'd be better off building a tight, efficient inner swarm and letting some sunlight go than trying to capture absolutely everything with far-flung shells. Capturing most but not all of the star's light can be the sweet spot. If you do build multiple layers, each outer layer has to be larger to intercept the waste heat of the inner layers and operates at a lower temperature. This quickly becomes a case of diminishing returns. The inner layer might be a hot 800 Kelvin and do a lot of useful work. It radiates to the next layer, which might be 600 Kelvin. Good, you get more work, but less than the inner got. By the time you're at layer 4 or 5, the temperature difference to space, 3 Kelvin background, is small, and each additional layer adds only a few % more total work. But each layer requires enormous extra material to encompass the larger sphere. One commentator quipped, "Would an advanced civilization really spend 10,000 times more material to gain that last 5% of efficiency, rather than just build a second Dyson Sphere around another star?" It's a fair point. Beyond a certain point, expanding in space beats layering at home. Why build ever more tenuous shells to catch dwindling trickles of waste heat, when you could send your machines to a different star and use fresh sunlight there? The opportunity cost of adding layers could be huge. Wright's findings basically reinforce this. Given finite resources, maximize the quality of energy use, high temp closer to the star, rather than quantity of photons caught. The optimum Dyson sphere might be smaller and hotter than the full sphere concept, meaning it deliberately lets some fraction of the star's light escape unused, because using that last fraction would force lower temperatures and efficiency. It's a bit like not bothering to pick up pennies when you have limited time. You focus on the high value dollars first. Even with nested shells, at the end of the line you still have to dump heat. A matryoshka just delays the final emission to a larger radius, lower temperature. You can make the final waste heat so cold that it's hard to detect, which might hide your sphere from prying astronomers. But you've also built possibly millions of kilometers of extra collectors to do so. If stealth is the goal, maybe not building a glaring Dyson to begin with is easier. In short, the idea of just build more shells to use all the waste heat encounters the reality of diminishing returns and practical limits. The outer layers contribute far less utility per unit of material. After a point, it's better to invest those materials in other projects, like more habitats, or other stars, or something completely different. This suggests that an uber-efficient civilization might never aim for a complete Dyson sphere. They might build a partial swarm that covers say 50% of the star's output, enough for their needs, and find that trying to catch the last 50% yields only marginal gains, but major headaches. Capturing 100% of anything in physics is usually a fool's errand. Dyson spheres epitomize that. The last few percent of starlight would be the hardest and least useful to trap. A deeper philosophical point underlies this thermodynamic critique. Raw energy consumption is not a linear proxy for civilization success or survival prospects. We often use the Kardashev scale, type 1, type 2, or 3, based on energy usage, as a benchmark for advancement. But blindly chasing energy output could be a dead end. If a civilization's goal is long-term survival, knowledge, or happiness, There are reasons to suspect that bigger power does not equal a better outcome. A civilization that uses gargantuan energy must dissipate gargantuan heat. If they live around that star, they have to manage the environment so they don't cook themselves. This might severely limit how much of the star's energy they can safely use for life support or habitats. It's ironic, a Dyson Sphere could collect roughly 1 billion times Earth's sunlight, but you can't funnel all that into living spaces or you'd incinerate. Most of it would have to go into energy-intensive processes, like cosmic scale computing, or propulsion, or matter conversion. That's fine, but those produce their own waste and challenges. The biosphere segment of a civilization might only ever use a tiny fraction of the power. The rest would be for non-life support activities, which might have diminishing returns, like running simulations or signaling, or moving stars. Things that don't necessarily multiply the number of happy beings or ensure survival. In ecology and philosophy, sometimes moderation enhances longevity. A civilization that moderates its energy use might avoid saturating its environment with waste heat, avoid resource exhaustion, and maintain stability. One that goes full Dyson might face new instabilities. Huge waste heat could alter orbits or climate of habitats. Massive engineering might have systemic failure modes, and their society must continuously grow or use that power in meaningful ways. If the usage is not truly needed, it could devolve into useless busyness, burning energy just because one can, possibly with negative side effects, like waste heat polluting interstellar space, or drawing unwanted attention. Using a star's full power speeds up local entropy increase. Some thinkers suggest advanced beings might actually do the opposite of a Dyson Sphere. They might go dormant, estivate, and save resources until the universe cools down, so they can compute more efficiently later. In that scenario, Dyson Spheres would be rare or temporary. An advanced civilization would rather bank its star's material or energy for future low temperature use, rather than squander it now. From this angle, a Dyson Sphere could be seen as short-sighted, a sign of a civilization still obsessed with immediate gains rather than ultimate optimization. If survival is the goal, focusing on redundancy, adaptability, and low vulnerability might matter more than maximum energy throughput. This will be discussed in the next sections. Scattering across multiple systems, using safer energy sources, etc., might yield a more robust civilization than putting all efforts into one star's megastructure. More energy doesn't automatically protect you from cosmic disasters or internal decay. It might even introduce more points of failure. In conclusion, thermodynamics teaches that a Dyson Sphere is blunt. It grabs the star's energy, but then one must handle that energy carefully. Waste heat, inefficiency of outer layers, and entropy costs all suggest that smarter, not bigger, could be the motto of truly advanced beings. Instead of chasing every watt, they might prize efficiency, selectivity, and stability. The Dyson Sphere starts to look like an extravagant gas guzzler, in an era where perhaps a sleek electric vehicle would do, or no vehicle at all if you can teleport. Next, we'll consider the civilization risks of Dyson projects. Even if you can build it and handle the energy, what does it mean for the society undertaking it? What could go wrong on the civilizational level? Building a Dyson Sphere or swarm isn't just an engineering and physics challenge, it's a civilizational project of immense scope. It would likely consume the resources of entire planets, require cooperation or coercion on unprecedented scales, and commit the future of the species to a single, colossal infrastructure. This introduces a host of risk factors that are as much social and political as technical. We'll explore a few. The fragility of having all your eggs in one basket, vulnerabilities to external catastrophes, and the societal management pitfalls of such a mega project. One immediate risk of a Dyson megastructure is that it creates a single point of failure on a civilizational scale. If a civilization becomes dependent on the energy and habitat provided by a Dyson sphere or swarm, then any major failure on that system could spell catastrophe for the whole species. It's the ultimate case of putting all your eggs in one basket, a basket perched around a volatile star. Consider some scenarios of this fragility. As discussed, a Dyson swarm requires continuous maintenance. If at any point the controlling systems fail, say there's a system-wide tech breakdown, a war, or a societal collapse, the swarm could start colliding and disintegrating. For a civilization that lives on no swarm satellites, or relies on them for energy beamed to habitats, the effect is apocalyptic. It would be like a slow-motion collapse of the entire orbital infrastructure, raining wreckage and cutting off power. In fiction, one could imagine the nightmarish image of a dying Dyson sphere, sparks of shattered habitats glinting as they spiral into the star. If that civilization didn't have independent colonies elsewhere, a Dyson sphere failure might be an extinction-level event. Contrast this with a civilization that spread to many star systems without fully enclosing any of them. The collapse of one doesn't doom all. A Dyson project likely entails disassembling planets for raw material, using Mercury or even Jupiter's mass as studies suggest. This means the civilization is converting a huge fraction of its home system into one specific structure. If something better comes along, a superior technology, or a need to adapt, they might have literally consumed the options. For instance, if you turn Mercury and other planets into solar collectors and later realize an error in design, you can't easily get those planets back. It's an irreversible commitment. Should the Dyson infrastructure fail, the civilization might find itself with a gutted solar system, no planets to retreat to, and a wreck of an energy system. This all-in gamble is risky compared to a strategy of diversification. For example, keep some planets habitable, have off-world colonies independent of the sphere, etc. A Dyson sphere could lock a civilization into a perpetual upkeep loop. Generation after generation must focus on maintaining this gargantuan machine, or everything falls apart within millennia or sooner. This could stagnate other progress or create societal strain. Imagine cultural or political movement that decides it's not worth it anymore, leading to neglect. The sphere doesn't care about political regimes. It only stays intact if actively managed. A society that's culturally over the Dyson idea can't just walk away from it if their survival depends on it. They'll chain to the machine they built, potentially limiting their freedom to evolve in other directions. Relatedly, committing to a Dyson sphere is a form of technological lock-in. It's such a massive investment that it might crowd out alternative innovations. For example, if an alternative energy source or approach to living, like uploading to simulated worlds that require far less energy, or moving into interstellar space where cooling is easier, becomes viable, a civilization deeply tied to its Dyson sphere might resist change. They might double down on maintaining their Type 2 status, even if it's no longer optimal, because that's where all their infrastructure is. This rigidity can be dangerous in a universe that throws curveballs. In essence, a Dyson sphere makes a civilization highly dependent on one star and one structure. Advanced wisdom might say, don't do that. Don't put your entire civilization on one scaffolding, however shiny. Instead, spread out and have backups. It's the principle of redundancy. Many small sources of energy might be safer than one big one. Earth knows this. We diversify our energy, fossil, solar, wind, nuclear. A galactic civilization might likewise diversify, some Dyson-like collectors here, some black hole generators there, etc. A full Dyson sphere is the opposite of diversification. Even if a civilization runs its Dyson sphere flawlessly, the universe might intervene. External threats, from astronomical events to interstellar intruders, could wreak havoc on a star-circling megastructure. Here are a few known cosmic dangers. These are extremely powerful explosions, usually from distant collapsing stars or neutron star mergers, emitting intense gamma radiation beams. If a GRB happened relatively nearby, and one of its lethal beams swept across a Dyson sphere, the radiation could fry electronics and habitats on the exposed side. A regular planet might have its atmosphere to somewhat shield life, with devastating but possibly survival effects on one side of the planet. But a thin solar collector or habitat panel has no such protection. It would be like a flash of sterilizing radiation punching through the structure. While GRBs are rare, over millions of years the chance isn't negligible. A Dyson sphere makes a big target. You can't easily hide a star, and if you're near the galactic plane, some GRB at that plane could hit you. If a star within tens of light years went supernova, the blast of particles and radiation could also damage a Dyson swarm. Additionally, a supernova shockwave can compress interstellar gas and send a barrage of cosmic rays. A robust civilization might shield against this, but it's another extreme scenario to consider. If you have large fragile structures, a nearby supernova could push or heat them significantly. In building a Dyson swarm, you might clear out most big objects in the orbital zone, possibly by using them as material. But star systems, especially the outer regions, often have reservoirs of comets, like the Oort cloud or Kuiper belt. Over long periods, gravitational perturbations from passing stars, etc., can send comets sunward. A Dyson sphere presents a huge cross-sectional area in the inner system. It's almost certain that if you don't constantly patrol and intercept, eventually a comet or asteroid will be on a collision course. Even if a medium-sized one, say a few kilometers across, hits a significant node of your swarm or shell, the damage could be disproportionate. Either a large hole in the shell, or a cascade of destroyed satellites. As mentioned earlier, Schultz and Makuch calculated that something like Halley's Comet mass hitting a rigid sphere would be like 1 million SAR bombs. That's game over for that section of a shell. In a swarm, one rock could take out dozens of satellites. Advanced defensive systems, lasers to vaporize comets, etc., would be necessary, effectively weaponizing the Dyson sphere for self-defense. But that adds another layer of complexity, and perhaps a risk of misuse of those weapons internally. It's speculative, but a Dyson sphere is a big "here we are" beacon. It could attract unwanted attention, perhaps other advanced beings who are expansionist or who want their resources. If there is any risk of interstellar conflict, a Dyson sphere might be a strategic liability, easy to spot and easy to target. It cannot be moved or hidden, and its destruction would cripple the civilization. It's like building a fortress that is also a beacon. Great if you are the only ones around, potentially dangerous if not. A theme emerges: flexibility and mobility versus static giant target. A civilization spread across many habitats, some of which could move or are in separate star systems, can respond to these threats better. One tied to a Dyson sphere is literally tied down. They would need extremely good foresight and defensive tech to mitigate these risks, effectively being invincible in all other ways except energy scarcity. If they're that advanced, maybe they didn't need a Dyson Sphere to begin with. We've touched on the technical and cosmic risks, but what about the social dimension of undertaking a Dyson Sphere? This project would dwarf anything humanity has ever contemplated. It's orders of magnitude beyond building pyramids or moon landings in terms of resource and coordination. What social and political strains might come with it? To build a Dyson swarm, an entire civilization, or a dominant faction of it, must agree to devote probably centuries of effort and the bulk of the solar system's material to the task. This implies a strong unified purpose or command structure. If the species is anything like humans, achieving that unity might require either remarkable consensus or some form of centralized authority, possibly an AI or post-singularity unified mind. Dissenters could be an issue. What if not everyone wants to dismantle planets for the sphere? There could be ideological or religious opposition. In worst case, a Dyson project could spur civil wars, those for and against it. If a war broke out during or after construction, the Dyson infrastructure becomes a prime target or collateral damage. So ironically, the pursuit of mega energy could incite conflict that undermines the civilization. Only a very stable and homogeneous society, or a very authoritarian one, might execute a Dyson build without such internal strife. The resources poured into a Dyson Sphere could mean neglecting other needs. A society has finite effort and maybe finite goodwill. If people, or AI units, are all busy stripping planets and assembling satellites, perhaps they aren't tending to other aspects like art, exploration, or even maintenance of existing colonies. There's a concept of opportunity cost. What else could those resources do? For example, instead of one Dyson Sphere, maybe they could have built 1,000 O'Neill cylinder habitats around many stars. If a political elite chooses the Dyson route, it might face opposition from those who favour a different path. And if the Dyson effort fails or drags on longer than expected, it could lead to societal disillusionment. Imagine a Dyson bubble crash, where everyone loses faith in the project after trillions of whatever currency spent. Societies that embark on mega projects can become defined by them. A Dyson building culture might orient its education, economy, and values around that goal, much like how cathedrals in medieval times dominated town life, but on a way bigger scale. This could stifle creativity in other domains. If a new challenge arises, like a looming supernova threat or a need to migrate, the society might be slow to pivot because we've invested everything in the sphere. In a rapidly changing galaxy, adaptability is key, and a Dyson-focused society might be the opposite of adaptable. It's literally anchored. The management of a Dyson Sphere might lend itself to central control by whoever runs the power distribution. Think of it. If one entity controls the output of an entire star, that's immense power, literally and figuratively. They could dole out energy to subservient populations or cut off dissidents. This is speculative, but a Dyson Sphere society could develop a power monopoly. If it's an AI in charge, perhaps it's benevolent, or not. If it's a government or corporation, it could become despotic simply by controlling the flow of life's energy. Decentralized energy, like each colony having its own fusion, gives more freedom, whereas one big power plant can equal centralized authority. Advanced civilizations might actually prefer not to concentrate power so much, to avoid tyranny or systemic collapse. On the flip side, suppose the Dyson Sphere is completed and now energy is limitless. What next? The society might face a sort of existential ennui. We did the ultimate, now we just bask in the power. Some sci-fi speculates that after achieving Type 2, a civilization might stagnate or turn inward. If the goal was to get more energy, and that goal is done, maybe complacency sets in. This could be dangerous if maintenance then gets neglected, or if curiosity wanes. We humans often find purpose in striving for scarce resources, or exploring. A Dyson Sphere would remove energy scarcity, possibly removing one driver of innovation. Of course, new goals, like using that energy for grand experiments, or art, or expanding beyond, could replace it, but it's something to consider. Overall, managing a Dyson Sphere is as much a social project as a technical one. It demands stability, unity, and foresight to an extreme degree. If a society has those qualities, perhaps it can mitigate the risks, but achieving those qualities might be harder than building the sphere itself. One could argue that by the time a species is stable and wise enough to do this safely, they might find better things to do than build a Dyson Sphere. We see that Dyson structures are fragile, not just physically, but civilizationally. One error, one conflict, or one unforeseen event, and the consequences are existential. That's a heavy risk to carry. Perhaps that's why, in the long run, advanced beings might favour redundant, modular, and distributed approaches to energy and expansion. Let's turn to those alternatives next. What other pathways exist that could be massively more efficient or safer than the Dyson Sphere? Our critical examination of Dyson Spheres reveals them to be inefficient, unstable, or risky in many ways. This begs the question, what might an advanced civilization do instead to meet its energy needs or growth ambitions? In this section, we explore several alternative strategies and technologies that could render Dyson megastructures unnecessary or unappealing. These range from the seemingly mundane, like fusion reactors, to the exotic, like black hole power plants, to the strategic, spreading out rather than concentrating. By comparing these alternatives, we'll see that Dyson Spheres are not the be-all and end-all of mega engineering. In fact, other approaches could be massively more efficient or practical. One straightforward alternative to building a Dyson Sphere is to create your own smaller stars on demand. In other words, master fusion power to such an extent that you can generate star-like energy outputs modularly. If you can build fusion reactors or artificial mini-suns in magnetic bottles, you do not need to encase a natural star. You can carry star power with you. Fusion, combining light elements into heavier ones like hydrogen into helium, is the process that powers stars. Advanced civilizations might develop reactors that achieve efficient fusion of abundant fuels. These reactors could be as small as a building or as large as a city, but crucially, they can be distributed. Instead of one giant power source, you have thousands or millions of smaller ones wherever needed. This inherently provides redundancy. If one reactor fails, others elsewhere are unaffected. A solar mass star contains a lot of fuel but burns slowly over billions of years. An advanced civilization might decide to use that fuel more directly. For example, they could engage in star lifting, extracting hydrogen or helium from the sun, and feed it into countless fusion reactors, or even create a network of tiny artificial suns. This would be a bit like breaking a large fire into many campfires. The total energy could match a Dyson Sphere's output, but spread across many units. Fusion reactors can be turned on or off, output adjusted, and they are localized, so any accident is limited. A Dyson Sphere is all or nothing with a star's entire fire. With modular fusion, if one reactor overheats or a region doesn't need as much power, you can shut a few down. Maintenance can happen one reactor at a time without blacking out the whole civilization. Also, the waste heat from many small reactors can be radiated in many places, avoiding a single huge heat dump. Each reactor can have its own heat management, like large radiators or cooling systems. In contrast, a Dyson Sphere must handle all heat in one integrated system. It might actually be easier to achieve practical fusion power than to build a Dyson Sphere. Humanity today is closer to building workable fusion reactors than disassembling planets. By the time a society could even contemplate a Dyson Sphere, they likely have long since cracked fusion, so they might just stick with that. One counter-argument is scale. A single fusion reactor might produce, say, a few gigawatts. You'd need billions of them to equal a star. But maybe you don't need to equal a star. As we argued, capturing all a star's output is likely unnecessary. And even if you did want enormous power, advanced automation might make mass-producing reactors trivial. There was a remarkable estimate in a discussion that an orbital swarm could be built in 31 years, using self-replicating machines doubling output rapidly, presumably the same principle that could churn out fusion reactors across space in short order. In short, fusion is a decentralized Dyson Sphere. It transforms star fuel into usable energy on your own terms. Many science fiction futures and real scientific plans lean on fusion as the key to energy abundance without needing megastructures. It's simply a more controlled, flexible approach. Why move a star's worth of light to you when you can do star-like reactions wherever you are? Another pathway is harnessing exotic fuels like antimatter. Antimatter annihilation, matter meeting antimatter, converts mass to energy with 100% efficiency, E equals mc squared. It's the most energy-dense process known, far beyond chemical or nuclear fusion. If you can produce or collect antimatter in significant quantities, you have a portable star in a bottle. It's notoriously hard to make antimatter. We do it in particle accelerators at great energy cost. But an advanced civilization might find ways, for instance using massive solar-powered lasers or particle colliders to generate antimatter, or harvesting natural antimatter trapped in the magnetic fields of planets. Earth and Jupiter have tiny antimatter belts. Another idea, astrophysical processes like pulsars or black hole accretion disks sometimes create it. Maybe it could be collected there. Antimatter is like an energy currency. You could produce it in one place or time and store it carefully in magnetic traps for later use or transport to where needed. For powering starships, antimatter is excellent. For a stationary power grid, antimatter would be a way to store excess energy and then release it when needed. It complements something like fusion. Use fusion or solar to make antimatter. Then you don't need continuous Dyson level flux. You can stockpile energy. If you can efficiently create antimatter using, say, a fraction of your star's light, you effectively bank the star's energy in a dense form. This might be more sensible than converting it all to infrared waste as a Dyson Sphere would. You could even transport antimatter to other colonies, whereas a Dyson Sphere's energy is mostly stuck around that star, unless you beam it out with inefficiencies. Antimatter is like bottled starshine. A kilogram of antimatter annihilating with matter yields 9 times 10 to the power of 16 joules, the equivalent of billions of kilograms of chemical fuel. A few comets worth of antimatter could surpass a star's yearly energy if you had them. So an advanced civilization might put effort into an antimatter economy rather than macro engineering around a star. Antimatter is volatile. Contain it or it'll explode. But an advanced tech base could have excellent magnetic confinement and safety protocols, and likely wouldn't store huge amounts in one place. They'd distribute it to mitigate blasts. Compared to a Dyson Sphere systemic risk, antimatter is high risk on a small scale. A bad accident could vaporize a city perhaps, but it's a modular risk. not whole civilization risk. Essentially, antimatter provides star-level energy on demand without needing continuous capture. It's another path to Type 2-like capabilities, generate and stash energy at convenience. If stars are inefficient, why not use a black hole? It sounds counterintuitive. Black holes are famous for swallowing light, but a rotating black hole is actually a phenomenal store of energy, and physics provides a few methods to extract it. Roger Penrose proposed that if you throw objects into a rotating black hole's ergosphere, the region just outside the event horizon where space-time is dragged along with the rotation, you can, with clever timing, cause some of the object's energy to be extracted as it falls in. Essentially, you drop mass in such a way that you get more energy out than you had when you dropped it in, stealing some rotational energy from the black hole. This is a one-time or few times trick per piece of mass. A more practical continuous method, proposed by Blanford and Znajek, uses magnetic fields. If you have a spinning black hole threaded by magnetic field lines, for example via an accretion disk of plasma around it, the rotation can drive currents along the field lines and emit energy in the form of pointing flux, electromagnetic outflows. This is believed to power the jets of quasars and active galactic nuclei. In effect, you tap the spin of the black hole electromagnetically. Rotational kinetic energy of the black hole can be enormous. For a maximally spinning hole, up to 29% of its mass energy is theoretically extractable via Blanford-Znajek. Another idea alluded to in the popular mechanics piece is creating a micro black hole with photons, a Kugelblitz. A small black hole, say mass of a mountain, would Hawking radiate energy, or could be fed mass and energy extracted. Hawking radiation for stellar mass holes is negligible, but for very tiny ones it's intense, though hard to harness because it's so rapid. Alternatively, feed a micro black hole with matter and capture the radiation, like a tiny Dyson sphere around a micro hole, ironically. Black holes can convert mass to energy far more efficiently than stars. For comparison, fusing hydrogen to helium converts approximately 0.7% of mass to energy. Accreting mass into a spinning black hole can liberate 10%, non-rotating Schwarzschild, up to 40%, max spinning Kerr, of the mass energy as radiation or jets. So 1 kilogram of stuff dropped into a disk around a black hole could give back say 0.1 to 0.4 kilograms worth of E equals mc squared energy and radiation. That's orders of magnitude more bang for the buck than nuclear fusion. A well-fed black hole could outshine many stars. In fact, quasars, which are black holes eating matter, can be 1,000 times brighter than a galaxy of stars. One could imagine an advanced civilization deliberately capturing a black hole or creating one, then engineering an accretion disk and magnetic field set up to continuously generate power, basically a man-made quasar or active black hole generator. The energy output could be beamed via jets or collected by surrounding structures. It's definitely exotic, but a civilization that thinks on Dyson scales might master such feats. And notably, a black hole generator is more compact than a Dyson Sphere for the same output. It could be dangerous if it gets loose, but presumably you'd keep it well contained. If it threatens to consume too much, you stop feeding it. Black holes can store energy for extremely long times. A spinning black hole left alone will keep its energy basically forever, until Hawking radiation trillions of years later. You could gradually tap it as needed, contrast with a star which will burn out in billions of years regardless. Black hole farming might be part of a long-term strategy to survive beyond star lifetimes. Convert a star into a black hole battery, and sip from it over eons. All this to say an advanced civilization might skip the Dyson Sphere and go for a Dyson-sized power source in a much smaller package, a black hole. It's like replacing a bonfire with a laser, more focused and intense. It might sound far-fetched to us, but given enough time, figuring out black hole energy extraction seems within the realm of advanced physics. These processes are already studied in astrophysics. If a civilization masters this, a Dyson Sphere appears clunky by comparison. Not all solutions are fancy physics, some are about strategy. Why concentrate in one star system at all? Colonize many systems, build modest infrastructure in each, and network them. This approach values redundancy and modular growth over monolithic projects. As one forum commenter hinted, why spend 10,000 times the material to eke 5% more efficiency from one star, when you could just go to another star? A civilization that has interstellar capability might find it easier to create smaller swarms, or power stations around many stars rather than one huge shell at home. Many partial Dyson swarms, or simply large orbital habitats drawing some solar power, across 100 star systems can provide comparable total energy and space for population, without any single failure killing them all. This is essentially a Type 2 civilization by aggregate, rather than by one star, almost like Type 3 light, spreading out its Type 2s. With distributed colonies, if one system suffers a disaster, natural or self-inflicted, others survive. Knowledge and culture are not all in one basket. This dramatically lowers existential risk. Even if energy is somewhat less efficiently harvested per star, because they chose not to fully enclose each star, the trade-off for safety is worth it. Evolutionarily, life spreads out to avoid being wiped out by local events. A wise civilization might do the same. Instead of one project that must be finished to be useful, modular infrastructure means you build incrementally and get benefits at each step. For example, you start with a few orbital habitats around your star, then gradually add more, maybe 1% Dyson swarm equivalent. Meanwhile, you send generation ships or automated probes to nearby stars to set up similar habitats. Each step yields a return, without requiring the entire Dyson completion. Dyson Sphere construction is somewhat all or nothing to realize its full potential, though a swarm can be gradual, yes, but its benefits scale with coverage. Modular expansion ensures no single phase failure voids the whole plan. By spreading out and doing smaller projects repeatedly, a civilization can learn and improve designs. The first mini-swarm might have issues, but by the 10th star, they've perfected it. If you jump straight to a Dyson Sphere Prime, you might encounter a fatal flaw too late. A distributed approach is more forgiving. Mistakes at one star don't doom all, and improvements propagate to new builds. It's the difference between deploying 1 billion small devices versus one giant device. The former allows iterative design, the latter must be nearly perfect on first try. One reason people imagine Dyson Spheres is the idea of a central computing or living hub, but with advanced communication, possibly FTL communications if those exist, or just accepting a bit of light speed lag, a civilization might not need to lump everyone together. In fact, computation might be more efficient when spread out in cooler regions. So perhaps they deliberately distribute their brains across light years to keep them cool and safe. This is a very different version, not a shining sphere in one spot, but a web of smaller constructs spanning the stars, quietly humming. It's less visually striking, but arguably more robust and stealthy. In summary, Expansionist civilizations might sidestep megastructures by simply expanding, period. Space is big, why squeeze around one sun when you can take bites of many suns? The end result, lots of energy and room, can be achieved with far less extreme engineering per star, albeit at the cost of interstellar distances to manage. But if they have time and tech, that's not an issue. Finally, let's touch on truly exotic energy sources that could make even black holes look pedestrian. These are speculative, but often floated in sci-fi and advanced theoretical discussions. Quantum field theory suggests even empty vacuum has a ground state energy, zero-point energy. In principle, tapping it could yield enormous energy everywhere in space. So far, there's no known way to net extract usable energy from the vacuum without putting at least as much in. The Casimir effect shows vacuum forces but doesn't give free energy net. However, a super advanced civilization might crack some loophole on new physics that allows drawing energy from the fabric of space. If that's possible, Dyson Spheres would be obsolete. Why build structures when every cubic meter of space is a potential power source? They could have generators that pull energy from the vacuum fluctuations, or even stabilize wormholes that output energy. This may violate known physics, but the point is, after a certain level, a civilization might progress beyond relying on stars at all. Freeman Dyson said himself, paraphrasing, "The only rule is, if it's physically possible, some advanced species might do it." Zero-point energy might or might not be physically possible, but it represents the idea of energy beyond stars. If those mysterious components of the universe can be manipulated, they could have vast reservoirs. For example, if dark matter can annihilate or be catalyzed to release energy, a civilization might mine dark matter in the galaxy's halo and get more energy than all stars combined. Dark energy, the force driving cosmic expansion, is even more colossal. If one could tap a tiny fraction, it would overshadow any star. These are extremely speculative, but a civilization millions of years ahead could have insights here. Instead of feeding a star to get light to run solar panels, maybe directly convert matter to energy in arbitrary ways, like matter-antimatter on demand, or using neutrino beams, etc. Computation in cold space was mentioned earlier. Maybe they forego luminous energy and use things like reversible computing or quantum computing that dissipate minimal heat by operating near absolute zero. Then their energy needs for computation are tiny compared to a hot, wasteful classic computer that a Dyson Sphere might power. This is more an avoidance of needing energy through better tech. Perhaps advanced beings upload into photonic or quantum systems that can be super energy efficient, or even into the fabric of space, becoming Boltzmann brains or something bizarre. At that point, a star's output is irrelevant because they can exist on background energy or minimal trickles. These exotic routes highlight a philosophical point. Dyson Spheres are a very material brute force solution, rooted in our current understanding of needing lots of physical energy for industry and computation. But advanced intelligence might find clever shortcuts, or entirely new domains of physics, akin to how early 20th century folks envisioned mega-scale chemical engines, and never anticipated the micro-scale transistor revolution, which would give enormous capability with tiny energy per operation. Dyson Spheres could likely be leapfrogged by a paradigm shift, making them look like an antiquated monument of a juvenile civilization that hadn't yet found a more elegant solution. To an outsider, a star enclosed in a metal shell might actually scream, "These guys didn't figure out a better way." It could be seen as almost a failure of imagination. Impressive, yes, but also inelegant. Meanwhile, the truly advanced neighbours might be doing incredible things with barely any signature. In conclusion, for alternatives, from fusion and antimatter, practical and modular, to black holes, high density and powerful, to galactic diaspora, spreading out risk, to new physics, transcending stellar energy, there are many routes a civilization might take. Each of these paths seem to address some of the Dyson Sphere's flaws. They increase redundancy, reduce waste heat issues, avoid single point failure, or just achieve the same ends more efficiently. Given this landscape, Dyson Spheres may not be the inevitable end state of civilizations, but rather one hypothetical route, possibly a less favoured one. Finally, let's consider one more angle that ties together many of the above points: detectability and the SETI perspective. If Dyson Spheres are such a mixed bag, perhaps the reason we haven't seen them is not that no one can build them, but that those who can choose not to. Dyson Spheres have long been a staple of SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence discussions. Freeman Dyson's original suggestion was essentially, if aliens build these, we could spot them via infrared. So far, existing infrared surveys have not found any obvious Dyson signatures. No star that is dark in visible light but glowing in mid-infrared, in a way consistent with a full megastructure. What does this mean? Are advanced civilizations absent, or are they simply avoiding Dyson-like megastructures, or concealing them? This section explores why we never see Dyson Spheres, not necessarily because aliens aren't out there, but because they might have good reasons to avoid advertising themselves with giant luminous beacons. We'll also consider if Dyson structures do exist, could they be more subtle or camouflaged forms that we wouldn't easily recognise? A fully realised Dyson Sphere or dense swarm would make a star system conspicuous. It would alter the star's signature dramatically, essentially converting a bright star into an infrared object. Such a thing stands out against natural astrophysical phenomena, at least to a reasonably advanced survey. We on Earth could detect something like that out to thousands of light years theoretically. So any aliens in our galaxy with Dyson Spheres should have been flagged by now. Unless one, they are extremely rare, maybe none in our surveyed volumes, or number two, they aren't being built in the obvious full output way, or number three, they are somehow hiding their waste heat. Point 1 might simply mean intelligent life is rare, or doesn't reach Type 2 often, but points 2 and 3 are intriguing. Maybe advanced civilizations deliberately avoid lighting up the sky with IR. Here are reasons they might avoid that neon sign behaviour. We touched on external threats. If you're aware that you're not alone, you might not want to broadcast your existence to the whole galaxy with a huge infrared glow. A Dyson Sphere is essentially yelling, "Here I am, I have huge energy and maybe resources." This could attract unwanted attention, perhaps other advanced species or even something like robotic probes or von Neumann machines looking for energy sources. A civilization that survived long might be exactly the ones who didn't draw attention. In the famous dark forest hypothesis, advanced civilizations stayed quiet and hidden to avoid being targeted. Building a Dyson Sphere is the opposite of quiet. So if that hypothesis holds any water, we won't see Dyson Spheres because any civilization inclined to build them either got eliminated or learned better than to do so. Even if not for fear, perhaps the time a civilization could build one, they also could build it in a way that's camouflaged. For instance, they might use high Carnot efficiency so that waste heat is minimal or radiated at temps close to the cosmic background. In theory, one could have a Dyson-like structure that operates at say 30 Kelvin instead of 300 Kelvin by making it extremely large or multi-layered. Then its IR signature would blend with dust emissions that are also in that range, making it very hard to pick out. Alternatively, they might beam the waste heat in a narrow beam out of the galactic plane or some direction where no one like us is looking. Waste heat doesn't have to be isotropic. You could set up phased array radiators that direct most thermal photons in one direction, though that's technologically tricky. It might be doable with metamaterials or something. This way, anyone not along that beam wouldn't see much. A civilization might choose to only partially enclose their star, leaving it largely like a normal star with some dimming or irregular light curves. This would be much harder for us to distinguish from natural variability or dust rings. For example, a thin Dyson ring or a few megastructures might block 1% of starlight periodically, like the infamous Tabby star, which some speculated was partial megastructures, but turned out likely dust. Such partial swarms might be effectively invisible to current surveys because they don't drastically alter the star's total output. They might only siphon a manageable fraction and radiate it at temperatures that's not far off the stars. The civilization might figure we only need 0.1% of this G-class star. That's plenty. Let's not go beyond that and remain inconspicuous. Perhaps they convert star energy to forms that aren't easily detected by us. They could directly convert it to low wavelength radio waves or gravitational waves or something exotic, and then beam those to where they need. If they beam most of the energy in a tight laser or microwave beam to a specific target, then from Earth we wouldn't see a general IR glow. We might not see anything unless that beam sweeps us. This is like using a flashlight instead of a lantern. The Kardashev Type 2 assumes radiating waste heat isotropically, but a clever civilization might never do that. They channel energy intentionally. This relates to advanced engineering like wireless power transmission on a stellar scale. Star power could be captured and then laser transmitted out to wherever needed. From afar, the star might look slightly dimmer invisible because energy removed, but also not very bright in IR because not much waste heat locally. We could easily mistake that for just a naturally slightly dim star or one with a bit of dust. The simplest, maybe advanced civilizations find other ways, like we described in the last section, that leave no obvious signatures. If a civilization uses black hole power or fusion, their star might be untouched and look normal. We wouldn't see anything odd because there's no megastructure at all. They could be living on planets or habitats that are not detectable to us, using energy sources we can't discern. So the absence of Dyson spheres could mean presence of something else more subtle. From a SETI perspective, the silence in IR means either we're alone at that level, or aliens are either not doing Dyson spheres or hiding them well. Many SETI scientists like Jason Wright have considered the latter. Maybe our search strategies need to account for more subtle uses of energy. Wright's suggestion to look for small hot Dyson spheres was precisely because the big cold ones weren't showing up. Maybe if they exist, they might be smaller structures running hotter, thus radiating at shorter wavelengths than mid-IR, which we haven't focused on. But it could also be that advanced civilizations intentionally keep their stars shining normally or only modestly altered, either out of caution or simply lack of interest in total enshroudment. Let's indulge the scenario. Suppose Dyson-like megastructures do exist, but we haven't recognized them. What could they be like? Instead of a solid shell or dense swarm, perhaps aliens use ultra-thin, almost invisible films at certain orbits, like a web or a wispy net that captures some solar energy or siphons stellar wind, but is practically transparent in most wavelengths. For instance, a network of nanotech solar sails could be spread in a spherical shape, but with so little material that it doesn't occlude much starlight or radiate much. It might even be tuned to let visible light through, but capture UV or charged particles. We could look straight at a star and hardly notice anything. It's a Dyson Sphere in spirit, but not the dramatic kind we imagine. A civilization could deploy stellar engines that pull matter off the star, like feeding it into a black hole or using it in fusion reactors, without surrounding the star fully. A Shkadov thruster is a concept where a giant mirror partially surrounds a star to reflect light and create thrust moving the star. It's Dyson-like but only a partial shell. That mirror could double as an energy collector, reflecting light onto solar panels for example. From Earth, a star with a Shkadov thruster might have an odd light asymmetry, but we might not catch it unless the geometry is favourable. Or they might siphon plasma via magnetic fields, like a huge artificial prominence drawing mass off the sun. These are stealthier than full spheres, and could be mistaken for natural phenomena if done subtly. It's conceivable to make your energy collectors thermally stealthy, for example using multi-stage refrigeration, collecting solar energy in high-frequency photons, use it to do work, then dump waste heat at as low a temperature as possible, maybe via a huge radiator facing away from any observers, or even convert waste heat to some form that's hard to detect. They could also intentionally keep the waste heat at a wavelength that blends with interstellar dust emissions, around 100 Kelvin maybe, since a lot of dust glows at 30 to 100 Kelvin. It might be essentially cloaked in the noise of the galaxy's dust background. So even if they are using lots of energy, they're dumping it in a way that we can't pick out from natural processes. Perhaps instead of a permanent sphere, they use swarms dynamically. For example, a fleet of power satellites that can move in and out of position as needed, never a full shell at once. If we pointed a telescope, we might just see a slight flicker or transit when a satellite passes, but not a continuous IR source. Think of it like clouds of solar panels that gather then disperse. That would be harder to detect than a stable uniform swarm. If their major energy usage is for computing, they might physically locate their computing substrates in the outer solar system or in interstellar space to have a 3K heatsink. Then they don't need a Dyson Sphere at all. They just need small collectors to power those cold computers, or they slow their computation until they can do it at a low temp. To us, a civilization would be virtually invisible. No big heat, no big EM signals, maybe just some weight heat at 3 Kelvin we could never distinguish from the cosmic background. They would have effectively cloaked their civilization in thermodynamic invisibility. Given all these possibilities, the absence of evidence for Dyson spheres might indeed be evidence of absence. Absence not of life, but of that strategy. Civilizations may either die off before reaching it, or more intriguingly, choose pathways that don't leave loud techno-signatures. We should remember, a Dyson Sphere is very much a human-conceived idea of what super tech would do. It's possible aliens have very different priorities. Maybe they pursue efficiency, miniaturization, spiritual or simulation-based lifestyles that need far less physical energy. The sci-fi romance of grand megastructures might be more of a mirror of human monumentalism than a reflection of actual cosmic trends. Freeman Dyson himself acknowledged this when he said, "There is nothing so big nor so crazy that 1 out of 1,000,000 technological societies may not feel driven to do it, provided it is physically possible." In other words, Dyson spheres might exist out there, but they could be the rare crazy exceptions, not the rule. The rule might be far more mundane looking, or simply beyond our current understanding. We've journeyed through the many limitations and flaws of Dyson spheres and swarms, From gravitational physics to thermodynamics to societal dynamics, and contrasted them with alternative strategies that advanced civilizations might employ. The picture that emerges is thought-provoking. Perhaps the hallmark of truly advanced civilizations is not great big shining spheres, but a quiet absence of them. Dyson spheres, as iconic as they are in our imagination, may ultimately be monuments to our own era's brute force thinking. They represent a solution that is grandiose and tangible, the kind of thing a young technological species might dream up when it thinks of ultimate power. But as we tempered that dream with harsh realities, a theme repeated: inelegance. They are inefficient in usage of resources, last percentages of energy for massive cost. They broadcast waste and heat. They demand constant vigilance. For all their wonder, they may be as impractical as building a huge bonfire to stay warm, instead of inventing a thermostat and home insulation. We asked earlier, why do we imagine aliens building monuments instead of pursuing elegance and survival? It might be because we humans are still at a stage where we equate advancement with bigness and conspicuous feats. But advancement could also mean restraint, optimization, and foresight. An advanced civilization might value survivability, flexibility, and minimal environmental impact over maximal energy throughput. Instead of a Star Trek-like Dyson Sphere, perhaps the alien signal we eventually find will be subtle, a faint whisper in background radiation, a peculiar lack of high-energy waste where there should be, a star that lives far longer than natural because its owners carefully manage its fuel. Or maybe we'll find nothing at all, and that itself will speak volumes, telling us that the grandest civilizations leave the faintest footprints. So to be clear, none of this absolutely rules out Dyson spheres. They could still be built by some, especially transitional civilizations, or those with certain motivations. Maybe a truly desperate species boxed into one system might attempt it as a last resort. And the concept retains its almost spiritual appeal. A shell around a star feels like grasping the heavens, completing a realm. In science fiction, Dyson spheres will continue to symbolize ultimate engineering, but the romance should be balanced with realism. Any species capable of making one will also have confronted all the issues we discussed. They will have asked, is this worth it? Is there another way? And in many cases the answer may well lead them down different paths. For humanity, these reflections are valuable. If one day we reach for the stars, or for our sun, we should remember that bigger isn't always better. Sometimes wisdom lies in the small, the distributed, the invisible. The greatest monument to an advanced civilization might not be a sphere around a star, but the fact that it survived and thrived for eons without needing one. In the end, Dyson spheres and Dyson swarms are a thought experiment that push us to consider our future and the nature of progress. They challenge us to blend awe with pragmatism. As we've seen, the future might belong not to the brightest beacon, but to the most balanced flame, one that burns long, steady, and safely, almost unseen in the vast night of space. So what do you think? Would an enlightened species really shackle its star, or would it choose a quieter path? Share your thoughts below. And if this journey into the limits of megastructures stirred your imagination, support the Omega signal with a like and subscribe, so we can keep exploring the unknown together.